In this example, I'm going to show you how to create a DDC file for a RAC standby database using the command line interface. So in this case, the primary environment is a 2-node RAC environment, and the standby environment is a 2-node RAC environment. The Oracle software is already installed on both the primary and the standby. We've got the primary database already running on both nodes. Both instances must be up and running when you create the DDC file. We've also already created the shared storage. We've installed the Dbvisit software, the core components, which is the command line interface, dbv agent, and dbvnet. And the virtual IP addresses are already running on both of the primary and the standby environment. Now what we're going to do is we're going to use the dbvctl command. So in this example, just to highlight it again, the dbvisit base directory is on shared storage, which is on ACFS file system. And we've created the Dbvisit base directory underneath that. And underneath that, we've got the standby directory where our dbvctl command line interface is. So what we're going to do is run dbvctl-o setup, and I'm going to add the option no prompt. So what this does is if without the no prompt option, we will ask you questions and we'll do a confirmation after all the questions. So if you answer yes to a question, we'll ask again, are you sure, just to confirm, so that you can, if you typed it in wrong, you can just say no and you'll be asked again for the question. If you do no prompt, you don't get the confirmation question. So I'm just going to use the no prompt option and it will start the setup process. I am on the primary system where dbvnet and the agent is running, and on my standby environment, I've already started dbvnet and the agent as well. So I specify that. It's going to ask me now, do I want to create a new DCC file? And the answer is yes, so I'm picking option 1. It will then show me the instance names that it's picking, or the databases that it's picking up from the etc tab file. And you can see there it is listing the database, which is the dev database. And it's also, I've added the instance that's running on this specific node to the etc tab file as well. Now we want to connect specifically to the instance on the node that we're running. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick option 1, which is for dev1. And what it will now do is it will ask me what is the source. Now because we're on a RAC environment and we're using the virtual IP addresses that we've created specifically for use for Dbvisit standby, and they're already created and up and running, I can use that now to specify that as my source and my destination. And for the source environment, it is Kiwi 812-VIP. And so that's the virtual IP address for this specific primary RAC environment. It will then ask me for the ARC source location. Now this needs to be on the shared storage as well. So it's on ACFS, Dbvisit, ARC, dev, and that's going to be the location that I will be using. And then we actually connect through to the instance and we gather some information of the primary database. And we picked up that there's multiple instances and that it's a RAC environment. So what we do now is we then start asking you RAC specific questions. And what we ask first is, what is the first thread, so the first instance in the RAC environment's instance name, which is just dev in this case. So I'm just going to press enter because we will provide you with the default values, and that should be sufficient in most environments. So press enter. It will then ask me for the primary host name. Again, we are detecting this, so we put the Kiwi81, which is correct. That is the host that's running the dev1 instance. So I press enter. It then asks me for the AIM to confirm the Acm Instance. So I just press enter to accept that. We then ask for thread 2. So this is the second node in the primary RAC environment. And again, we detect this value, but we do need you to confirm this. So it is dev2. I'm happy with that. I press enter. We also detect that the second node in the primary RAC environment is Kiwi82. So we display that, and we just want you to confirm that. It then detects again the same, the Acm Instance on the second node. It is important that when you set up the new DDC file, when you're going to create the standby database, that in your RAC primary environment, all instances must be up and running. The next question that gets asked is, are we going to create a RAC-enabled standby database? Now, in this example, we are going to create a standby database that is RAC-enabled. So I'm going to specify yes to that. And then it's asking me, do I want to use SSH? Now, by default, we recommend you use dbvnet and not SSH. But if you prefer to use SSH, you can, but you need to make sure that you've got user equivalence between the primary and the standby environment, which is passwordless authentication. I'm going to use Dbvisit, so I'm going to say no to using SSH. It then asks me for the destination. Now, here's where you need to keep in mind that the destination is a RAC environment. We've created the virtual IP that's running currently on one of the standby nodes, which is where Dbvisit standby's agent and Dbvisit is running as well. And the virtual IP in this case is Kiwi 912-VIP. So that's the host alias name that's attached to that IP address. And it's recommended that that's in your DNS so that it will resolve. I press enter. It then just wants to confirm the Dbvisit port. Now in this case, in this environment, I am using the default, which is 7890. So I press enter. It then asks me for the Dbvisit base directory on the DR system, which is on the standby system, which again is on shared storage. And because my standby environment is an exact match to my primary environment, I know it's sitting on /acfs/dbvisit, and it's already installed. And as I mentioned, Dbvisit and the agent is running. So I can accept the default because I know that's where it's installed on the standby system. It then asks me to confirm the Oracle home. This is where you need to review the Oracle home because the Oracle home on the standby could be different than the primary. In my environment, it's exactly the same, which is what we recommend, and I'm happy with the value that's being provided. It then asks me for the DB unique name. Now, the DB unique name is very important in Dbvisit Standby version 8. And if you create multiple standby databases for the same primary on the same standby system, you need to make sure that you pick a different DB unique name for those standby databases. In this case, I would like to keep the DB unique name the same as the primary, which is the recommended option in most cases. And we'll select that as the default. It then asks me for the ArcDes location. This is the location on the standby system where I'm going to copy the archive logs to. So Dbvisit standby, when it runs on the primary and it ships archive logs through to the standby, it's going to use the ArcDes location. So the ArcDes location is where we store archive logs on the standby system. Now, because it's a RAC-enabled standby environment, we would like to put it on shared storage. This cannot be ASM, so it cannot be inside a specific ASM disk group, but we've created a shared storage using ACFS, which sits in ASM, and we've mounted that as /ACFS. And what we're going to do is we're just going to utilize that. So ACFS dbvisit_arch/dev for our specific database. And it's matching our ARC source location. Now remember, when you do a graceful switchover, the ARC source and the ArcDes locations will be swapped. So the ARC source becomes ArcDes and the ArcDes becomes ARC source. So I'm happy with the default value that's being provided, and I press enter. It then asks me information about the instances that's going to run on the standby environment. Now the standby environment in this case is a 2-node RAC environment. I know I'm going to run 2 instances. It's going to match my primary environment. So it's very important, the standby, if you want the standby to be a RAC enabled environment, it must match the primary environment in terms of node count. So the standby environment, the first question asks me is for thread 1. I'm going to use dev1 as the instance name. I accept that. And then it asks me for the host name. We can't detect that at this stage, so we are asking you for this information. And in my case, this is Kiwi91 as my host 1 on the standby environment. It then asks you to confirm the Acm instance that's running on node 1 for thread 1. And in most cases, that will be Acm1. It then asks me for the instance name on node 2 for the database. In this case, it's dev2, which is the default value, and I'm happy with that. Then we ask for the host name of the second host on the standby system, which in my case is Kiwi92. It then asks me for the Acm instance on the second node, which in this case again it's ASM2. I'm happy with that, and that's for thread 2 on the second node on my standby system. One of the last questions it's asking now is, what is the Ddc file name that I'm going to create? In this environment, my database is called dev. I actually recommend that you keep the Ddc name the same as the database name that you're creating for. You can create a different name. You're welcome to do that, but try and keep it short and try not to use special characters like underscore and dashes or anything like that. The default value should be sufficient for most environments. So I'm going to stay with dev, and I'm just going to create that. A summary screen is displayed with all the information of what I've supplied. And if I would like to change this, I can specify no here, and I will go through all the questions again, and you can then modify your answers. I'm happy with all the answers being provided in this case. We can see there all my RAC information for the my primary is being provided, and then all the RAC information for the standby is provided. I'm happy with the values being provided, and I'm going to say yes. The next step is it's creating the DDC file, but it's also creating the repository. And the repository is where we install some key information about the workings of Dbvisit Standby. As it's shipping logs, it stores minimum information inside the repository. The repository can be recreated at any time. So just to show you what has been created, we can look at the conf directory. So if I just do a ls in the conf directory, I can see that I now have my DDC file, which is dbv_dev.env, and I also have my newly created repository. So we have now successfully created a DDC file for a primary that's an environment that's RAC enabled, that's running 2 nodes, and then a standby database environment that's going to run on 2 nodes as well. And the next step would be now is to create the standby database.